The Chicago Bulls have a game against the Detroit Pistons tonight, a game in which if the Bulls win, they can clinch the ninth seed in the play-in tournament or whatever that's worth. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about how Haize and the Bulls front office could very well use this run if you want to call it that, but getting the ninth seed as a way to excuse a lack of activity yet again. We're going to talk about all that, plus an article from Bleacher Report predicting the destination of the Chicago Bulls free agents, all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content, man. And the Bulls' magic number right now to clinch the ninth seed is 1. With the Atlanta Hawks losing yesterday, it brought the Bulls just 1. They need one win or one more Atlanta Hawks loss to clinch the ninth seed in the play-in tournament and then be able to host a play-in game. And so, we'll see. The Bulls and the Hawks have basically been 9-10 since January 15th. We're talking about almost half the season. They've been in the same exact spot, despite some winning stretches there, some losing stretches there. The Bulls and the Hawks have basically been in the same exact position for the majority of the season. And so it seems like it's destined for the Bulls and the Hawks to take on each other in the playoffs, in the play-in tournament. And that just kind of is what it is when it comes down to that. But, this season for the Chicago Bulls, while it's been very disappointing, and all hope, I think for a lot of Bulls fans has gone on really this team doing anything really too differently. And, I kind of understand that. And Joe Cowley had an article out on the Chicago Sun-Times in which he talked about Haize basically saying that AK's problem isn't that he's not smart with basketball, but that his problem is that he has blind spots. And I actually thought that was kind of insightful, even though a Joe Cowley article is always going to be kind of hit or miss when it comes down to it. But when you really think about that, right, is that the blind spots that AK has are there, right? When you look at the fact of how attached he is to the players, when you look at the fact that he really did look at and hope that Lonzo Ball was going to return last season, not so much this season, that was gonna help the Chicago Bulls kind of up there, get in a higher place, maybe actually compete for something meaningful. And it seems like the blind spot that AK has more than anything is that he doesn't understand when it's time to cut ties. That's both with players, maybe even with the coach. That's just cut ties. And, the model that happened in Denver, the fact that we all looked at what Denver built, and the fact that it happened organically over time, that was never a team that ever tanked really at all. They got Jokic. They had some solid pieces there. They continued to build after that, and they let Jokic really develop into the MVP he was, allowed Jamal Murray to come back from ACL injury twice without really looking to move on from him. It was those type of things. But when you look at it, that team was so special in the sense that they did have a player that was drafted with the second-round pick that turned into an MVP caliber player. And while that does not take away from how the other things they did to build those teams, the other solid draft picks that they had in there and those type of things, AK does definitely have blind spots. And one of those blind spots seems to be kind of buying a little bit too much into your own hype. And by that, I mean this. The Bulls we just talked about have the magic number is 1 to lock in the ninth seed, in the play-in tournament. And it definitely does look like this team is going to look at running this thing potentially back. And especially if the Bulls make it out the play-in, you might as well write it off. They're going to re-sign DeMar Rosen, try to sell Lonzo Ball coming back. And the thing is that the great front offices that you see, the front offices that keep their team competitive, some of them definitely take step backs and take steps forward, which I've said before for this team. But outside of that, they understand when and where to move off of players. And for the most part, our previous front office, well, more so when it was ran by Paxson before Gar Forman came, they always understood when to move off players at the right time. You look at not re-signing Ben Gordon. You look at when Luol Deng, who was never really an impact player again for the Chicago Bulls, even allowing Amir Ashik to leave to the Houston Rockets, which he was a damn good player for us, but he never really turned. Like, he had I think 2 really good seasons after that, kind of died down after that. It seemed like that front office was more, and and that helped earn the reputation the Bulls had of not really keeping their own players, but they understood when and where to move off players, even though it was tough. Derrick Rose, they moved off Derrick Rose, even though the city loved him, right? And Derek still did have impactful seasons after that, but he was never that player again. And so it seems like AK, for what we've seen, is that so far, and we only have a small sample size to look at so far, you have the Lonzo Ball situation, which they can only do so much there. I understand. I know the career-ending injury exceptions there. They did file the disabled player exception that then we could not use because of ownership. You look at the Zach LaVine's scenario, had they moved him a year earlier for that New York Knicks deal, how much that would have changed. And then the Nikola Vucevic contract, which looks like it's going to be extremely bad for the Bulls over those final 2 years, even though there's really no market to really replace him. But again, that's where you're understanding the ebbs and flows. And so that could be AK's blind spot. AK is smart basketball-wise. And I'm glad that even in the Joe Cowley article, they did point that out. But for him to get out of the situation that the Bulls are in, and kind of clean up the scenario that we've seen, it's going to take AK getting his hands dirty. It's going to take AK cracking a few eggs to make a couple of omelets. That's what it's going to have to take. And so, ultimately, the doubt around the front office and their ability or how much they're really locked into winning, I understand that it's there, and you can't deny that you have to question that a little bit because you're not willing to win by any means necessary. And that's the situation where it's going to really sit this team or keep this team in a position where it's going to be rough until the Bulls get lucky. If they get lucky, let's say on this year's draft pick, if they get lucky on next year's draft pick, if they end up holding it, then yeah, it can up that ceiling. Or if, Julian Phillips really does hit a rise and a leap for the Bulls or whatever, right? Those are the things that you're looking for, and every front office has that to a degree where they're hoping and wishing that something sticks, right? But when you hold on to everything for dear life, which it seems like AK is prepared to do, that's where you start getting into the place where that does become a blind spot. And I love the fact that it was worded that way in that article, but you guys can let me know what you guys think on that. Do you think that AK's blind spots, and you can think that there are many of them, right? There's something that he can eventually overcome. And I know people have now started shifting to we got to move on from AK. We got to move on from AK. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to absolutely tell you right now, it's not happening anytime soon. It's just not. Unfortunately, it's not. You have to have an ownership group that is so passionate about winning that they would be willing to fire a front office they just brought in 4 years ago and just gave contract extensions to last offseason as well. So that's not something that I foresee happening. Hell, it took John Paxson and Gar Forman to lose their job because Pax went to ownership and said, listen, I don't think I know what I'm doing anymore. And he's still on payroll. That's the funny thing. He is still technically on payroll. That's where we sit right now as a franchise. So the hope right now that we have, the most important hope or the most realistic hope, is that AK realizes what he needs to do to really change where this team is headed in the direction of the team. And I, for one, have my doubts over the validity of that happening. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we'll see. But for the Bulls to make that determination on kind of going a new direction, and shout out to Big Diesel, who's been asking me, like, what do you do if DeMar leaves, things like that. The Bulls have to make decisions on some of their free agents. And the Bulls aren't in an envious position at all when you look at the fact of just how their salary cap is going to be structured next year, right? We are right up against that luxury tax if we re-sign DeMar Rosen, re-sign Patrick Williams. The most cap space that the Bulls could possibly have, and that is if they renounce all players, the most that they can have is negative $26 million. So listen, it's not happening, right? The Bulls aren't going to have this magic amount of money of cap space no matter what they do. It's just not something that's realistically going to happen. And because of that, then you have to get more creative. Now, we have $5 million under the luxury tax. That's something you may have to look at and see, right? But the Bulls are in a position where they're going to have to make some tough decisions, man. And, you can re-sign, per the cap holds. And if you sign them for less than the cap holds, of course, that gets you a little bit of money back on there, of course. But this Bulls team is in a place, man, where it's going to be tough this offseason to really make some changes. And Bleacher Report has an article on predicting where certain Bulls free agents are going to go. And in this, it's DeMar Rosen, Andre Drummond, Patrick Williams. I want to kind of talk about it and where I see. So first up, they have DeMar Rosen, who is an unrestricted free agent this year, probably going to win the Clutch Player of the Year award, which they might, at some point, they're probably going to rename the DeMar DeRozan Award. And they predict that DeMar DeRozan re-signs with the Chicago Bulls. Now, I think we all realize that is something that is a possibility, whether you look at that as fortunate or unfortunate. But when it comes down to it, DeMar DeRozan has earned another contract. I keep saying that. The way that he's played, specifically in fourth quarters, just when his play, in a vacuum, his play has earned another contract. The question that you then start running into is that you have a young and emerging team. Do you want to take a shot at putting these players out there to sink or swim and put them in a position to where, listen, Going to know exactly what they have. Maybe we then get to keep our 2025 first round pick if they do sink, right? Those type of things. But AK and Eversley, in their fear of taking a step back, right? Any type of step back is probably going to lead them to a place where they're either paying DeMar Rosen too much money, or they're paying him for too long with too many years. Or the worst case scenario, then it's both. It's too long and it's too much money, right? And that's the place that the Bulls in. And, I noticed I don't put DeMar walking away as this hugely bad situation. And the only reason why, and again, it'd suck to lose a player that walks away for nothing when you could have tried to look to move him and things like that. But I don't have that as the worst case scenario, just because it then gives you, you really have to look at your young, it removes a safety net for the players and for Billy Donovan, right? So I think ultimately right now it seems like DeMar's on a pace to stay here in Chicago. Now, there are teams that are going to have tons of cap space. I've talked a lot about how the Philadelphia 76ers have 3 players under contract. They're going to be looking to do something to build a team around Joel Embiid. If they strike out on the top free agents and those free agents end up staying with their teams, they could absolutely pivot to a DeMar or pivot to a Zach or something like that. So that's always kind of something that's out there in the background and a possibility. But I think more than likely, yeah, I agree. DeMar DeRozan's probably more than likely re-signing with the Chicago Bulls, and whatever that means is where it sits. Then you have Patrick Williams, right? A player that a lot of Bulls, he's so polarizing for some Bulls fans. Some Bulls fans look at Patrick Williams and still sees this player that has tons of potential, and he does. 22 years old, he still has tons of potential, and even at bare minimum being a 3-and-D player. But the Bulls, in going into these contract negotiations, have to ask themselves, what's the price they're worth paying for that? And that's where it starts getting a little tricky, is that, again, Patrick Williams is a player that has still not shown the mentality, still not shown the consistency, still not shown really an ability to really step up when needed most. He's had games absolutely where he stepped up, but the consistency is a huge thing that you're looking at from Patrick Williams. And I think that if the Bulls go to the table with a deal that him and his agent don't look at as reasonable or fair, it's going to end up, and this is what Bleacher Report says as well, that he's going to have to go out and sign an offer sheet somewhere else. And then you have to ask the question, will the Bulls match? Now, Bleacher Report has it that they're going to match it regardless. And here's what I'm going to say. If a team really does look at Patrick Williams and is willing to offer him the max that he can get, which I think is a small possibility, I don't know if the Bulls do match that. Now, I don't think that the Bulls let it get there. I think they're going to try to work out that contract as best they can. The injury to Patrick Williams and having a injury, that injury can linger on. I'm talking about all offseason for Patrick Williams. I think that has created a situation in which Pat is probably going to sign a 3-year deal. I don't think it's going to be for the full years available. I think it's going to be maybe a 2+1, whether the team or the player has the option there. And I think this is going to play out in a way that, it gets Patrick Williams back on the market early. It's going to give him an opportunity to really show how and where he belongs, and then maybe get him more money in the long term. So that's how I think that that's going to work out with that. And then Andre Drummond is the last player on here. Now, they have that Andre Drummond signs with the Memphis Grizzlies, which when you look at what they've given up at that center position, how they need some depth, that absolutely can be a potential landing spot for Andre Drummond. But it comes down to this. Drummond has played the last 5 seasons on a veteran minimum deal. And that's not just with the Chicago Bulls, it's the teams that he played with before then, of course. And while, the 18, he averages less than 18 minutes per night, there are going to be some teams that have a setup and they have a foundation to where they can play him more than that. And so that's something that you also have to look at for the teams. And I know I would love to see Drum stay here, and I don't, unless the Bulls trade Zach LaVine and don't get as much salary back, or if they let DeMar DeRozan walk, I do think that there's a complete possibility that Andre Drummond is gone. Now, I do think that the Bulls also could go big in this draft, and that big is probably going to come off the bench initially, so maybe they create minutes for that big by doing that. Also give Adama Sanogo a shot, which we're going to, I guess, get to see tonight a little of Adama Sanogo. We'll see. But that's another situation that I kind of agree with. I don't know if Andre Drummond, if the Bulls make an offer and a respectable offer, I think he'd keep it to stay here. But with the Bulls being as up against that luxury tax as what they are, and make sure you guys remember, you can be over the salary cap, but not over the luxury tax, and that's where the Bulls live in. And so because of that, I think that that's where you got to look at. There's a complete possibility that Andre Drummond is no longer on the team next season, but we'll see. But one thing that we got to get to before we get into that, we got a game tonight against the Detroit Pistons. Andre Drummond is listed as doubtful via the information that we had as of this recording. This episode could go up and we could find out that he has a severe injury that's going to need surgery. But, if that happens, we're going to get out an emergency episode. You know that, right? So you're going into this without your backup big. And this is a team that has beaten you twice before. The Bulls have to be on their P's and Q's, as they have to every game. The Bulls have to have such a defensive intensity if they even want to hope to be able to be in this game. And yes, the Detroit Pistons are coming on this game with a 5-game losing streak. But as we know, the Bulls seem to be a team that teams can tune it up against. So the Bulls got to be prepared in this one, man. Like I said, they got the magic number of 1. They can lock in that 9th seed, a home play-in game for the fans of the UC that hopefully they perform better in than what they did in the last regular season home game. But we're going on the road against Detroit. This is a young, scrappy team that gives Bulls fits. We've already talked about how they've beat us already this season. The Bulls got to be prepared. And that means playing smartly. You can't have the dumb mistakes that you had in the last game against the New York Knicks. You cannot do that. If you do that, you're going to get killed. And I don't care who the opponent is. If you make dumb mistakes, you win dumb prizes, and that's going to be a loss. So the Bulls got to be prepared in this one to try to come in here and execute, specifically defend. You want to snuff this young team out. And then on the offensive side of the ball, push the pace. Get out in transition when it makes sense. Move the ball around. Move without the ball. It's the same things. Last 3 games of the season, it's all the same shit. Defense, rebounding, take the right shots, hit the shots effectively. Do we continue to see Kobe White step up like he did in the last game? Would love to get good Kobe White again in this game to finish out the rest of this regular season. Those are things that we need, and we're probably, even against a Detroit Pistons team that's lost 5 games in a row, going to need DeMar Rosen in the 4th quarter. So let's see what we got, y'all. We could be playing extremely small today. We'll see if Billy Donovan gives Adama Sanogo another shot with Andre Drummond being doubtful to play in this game, or if we just play extremely small with Torrey Craig playing some small ball 5, which has its own risk, especially against a team like this. So we'll see what the Bulls can do, man. You know, guys know I don't predict wins and losses for the Chicago Bulls. I haven't basically since I started this show, but this is a game where the Bulls need to be locked in. And if they want to get a win, if they want to secure that 9th seed in the play-in, they got to be locked in today. Let's hope that the Bulls can do that. Now, before we go, I got one last thing to talk to you guys about. The ESPN has flexed the Bulls season finale against the New York Knicks, in which they will now be playing on ESPN at 1 p.m. on Sunday. So that's going to be a nationally televised game for the Chicago Bulls. They flex it. They didn't flex out of anything. They're just picking that game up. So that means that game's going to be aired on ESPN. Not that it matters heading into the play-in. It's the last game of the season. I'm sure it's more so because the people want to see Jalen Brunson continue to cook. He's playing at a damn near MVP level here lately. But hey, guys know I got to update you on everything. And so that's the latest. The Bulls will be flexed into ESPN nationally televised game for the season finale, the regular season finale against the New York Knicks. So make sure you guys are tuned in for that. But that's my time for today, guys. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bull Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the #1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, thanks to you guys. I'm going to keep plugging this. If you're on the YouTube side, go over to Apple Podcasts, go over to Spotify, leave a rating and review there. If you're on the podcast side, go over to YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Help us get to our goal of 20,000 subscribers. I appreciate you guys so much for everything and making this show what it has been. I love you guys. See red, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.